in the light of the prevailing way of life of ancient man. During the so-called Golden Age of Pericles and the great Greco-Latin culture, most countries had their own religions, their own temples, their own sanctuaries, and these religions were state faiths. They were financed by the state and were made available to the people. The citizen of a country in good standing therefore worshipped the gods of his country, defended them, and sought from them such help as he might need. In those days, the general attitude of mankind on religious matters was to the effect that the religion and the state were identical. Any attack against the state was an attack against religion. Any opposition or attack upon religion was an attack upon total society. Therefore, what we commonly call today intersectarian squabbles could not exist. The individual was born and raised within a national or community religion. Because of this factor, he expected other states or communities to have their own faiths. If he journeyed into another area, he generally remained courteous to the deities of that region, and seldom attempted or even contemplated any missionary or evangelical attitude or procedure. It did not occur to him that it was right or proper for him to attempt to change the basic faiths of the nations in which he visited or traveled, nor would he tolerate others coming into his areas and attempting such procedures. It would seem, therefore, that these areas would remain very much isolated and that religious unity would be next to impossible. The appearance, however, has deceived many persons, including scholars. The facts were somewhat different. Behind the state religions of these different areas were always the secret societies. These were composed mostly of scholars, philosophers, sages, travelers, educators, persons whose knowledge of their own religion and the religions of other peoples exceeded that of the average citizen. Therefore, these various faiths, apparently isolated, were bound together by a network of mysteries or schools of common initiation. And a traveler on the level of the secret society, journeying from Greece to Egypt, found that he was not traveling from one religion to another, but from one interpretation to another. He was therefore constantly reminded that in the core of things, the gods of all these groups were identical deities, known under different names, worshipped with somewhat differing ceremonials, but dedicated to the same principles, and the sciences taught in these different groups were identical, and the arts and the general knowledge were shared by all, regardless. Therefore, Pythagoras, 600 years before the Christian era, traveling throughout the world, visited and was received hospitably and lovingly by over 20 religions, each of which accepted him without question and accepted his knowledge without question. Consequently, the general archetype behind this situation was that the local deities were bound together by a larger interpretation, and that those who entered the secret societies became interreligious in their thinking. For this reason, actual war against any person or group, because of religion primarily, was exceedingly rare, almost unknown. You did not declare war on a man's faith. You might oppose his political structure, which incidentally, of course, included his faith. You might desire his territories. You might seek to gain his wealth, but you did not openly declare war against his God. This was a situation which in many respects resulted in more favorable situations after a period of hostility. When peace was restored, the God concept set in again, and the divisions that might have been otherwise irreconcilable were often mended in this way. Secret societies, therefore, served a great number of purposes and were more widely and generally used than we recognize. In Greece, every free person, man and woman, was entitled to initiation. Consequently, it was not uncommon at the rites of Eleusis in Attica for 25,000 persons to be initiated as one ceremonial. It was therefore not merely a small group, but the whole of the cultural pattern was invested in these principles. Naturally, there were smaller schools of specialized instruction, and by degrees these schools became trade schools and union schools, protecting arts and crafts, demanding apprenticeships, and our entire concept of the apprenticeship system as a means of advancing skill in an art or science or craft. This arose in the secret societies, for the most common things were so organized. In early England, the tailors had their own secret society. So did the plumbers. Secret societies were not left entirely to abstract speculation. Men had a certain pride in their own achievements and a certain sense of responsibility for the quality of their work. In those days, this responsibility was invested in guilds, and guilds were an outcome of classical secret societies. It was the guild that instructed the apprentice, gave him the choicest secrets of his profession or trade, and bound him with obligations to use this knowledge constructively and honorably. It was therefore a most signal offense against society and God to shoddy the workmanship, to use inferior materials, or in any way to misrepresent a contract. The God concept still occupied the mind of the guild masters. Each meeting of the tailors and the plumbers and the shoemakers and the tinsmiths, each meeting was opened with religious ceremony. Each meeting was closed with prayer. And during the period of these meetings, when matters of common concern, of charity, of taking care of needy or impoverished brethren, whenever these matters were examined, it was in a sanctified atmosphere of dedication, and to each of these guilds, deity represented the peculiar guild master. In other words, of all the shoemakers, God was the great shoemaker. Of all the tinsmiths, God was the great tinsmith. Of all the architects, he was the sovereign architect of the world. To all the physicians, he was the master of healing. Each in his own way, therefore, developed a guild faith, a faith based upon performing his normal human activities, his trade, his profession, as a sacred service, as a dedicated recognition of his responsibility to society. And whatever he did that was useful and helpful to others was a form of religious sacrament. The development, therefore, of great projects with comparative smoothness of procedure, marked that time, in a day when great mausoleums, temples, palaces, and tombs required from 50 years to 500 years for their completion. The work proceeded in an orderly manner. It was hardly necessary to inspect the work. The masters of the guilds inspected the work themselves and were more critical than any outsider could possibly have been. Also, they regulated the wages of the workmen. They held the various religious meetings that were necessary. And from this we observe inevitably the rise of a religious spirit, a spirit not directly consistent with the general prevailing orthodoxies of those days, a religion which moved directly into action, a religion which was not drowned in theory, but was constantly vitalized by practice. Thus, religion itself passed through certain modifications. The guild masters did not leave their faiths. Very often they met in the chapels, temples, cathedrals, and churches of their religions. But at the same time, they brought to their religion something previously not so well emphasized, and that was the importance of applying your faith and its principles to the works of your hands, so that each task that was performed was sanctified by the integrity with which it was performed. This type of condition has also drifted down to us in the form of trade unions, in the form of various labor organizations. But little by little, the religious factor has diminished, and these organizations have become protective, essentially, rather than almost completely idealistic. In the religious pattern also, we gradually discover that the decline of the so-called Greco-Latin culture brought with it a gradual motion toward the unification of religion. And of secret societies, we should point out those in which religious rites in areas apart from the natural home of a faith came to be emphasized. The secret societies of early Christendom are at point, and also we should mention the secret societies of the wandering and exiled Jewish minorities. Both of these groups, finding themselves in mostly unfriendly regions, united more and more among themselves in the effort to preserve and maintain their faiths. The secret meetings of Christians in the catacombs under Rome and other such organizations naturally led to the rise of religious societies, where only persons trusted, tested, and tried could be permitted to join the group, for a traitor might have resulted in the death of them all. Thus, the secret society that had originally initiated merely to improve society in general, now initiated to preserve itself, to maintain its own concepts, doctrines, or ideals in a hostile environment. From these rootings, a number of other modifications gradually appeared. After the rise of Christendom, and it passed into a more or less positive relationship with society, the non-Christian minorities, who had once dominated, also found it expedient to organize against the rising power of Christendom. Thus we have a number of fringe organizations preserving their non-Christian identities for centuries after the rise of the church. They accomplished this by the use of the greatest secrecy. and with